Heather, do you think that racism that's directed towards brown-skinned people, do you think that hurts all of us in the nation, those of us with our color skin, those of us with all different shades? Do you think that racism towards our black and brown brothers and sisters hurts the whole country?
I personally think it does because, I mean, as we were just talking about, of working in libraries and in museums, your whole point is to what story do you want to communicate. That's really the driving force behind every exhibit that you do, behind every collection that you're doing in the archives, or anything with researchers. It's all about stories and what do people have access to with researchers. And I think that racism and that there has been, all those stories have been, it's limited stories, and it's given us singular stories, especially around, if you look at things in like the 1800s, or I mean even just like the story of racism in America, like especially if going from slavery, is you have like, oh yeah, well we come over on slavery, and then the Civil War happens, and then you have Jim Crow, and then we go into, and you have terrible evil things of like lynching and like racial terrorism, and and then we go on, and then you have things like civil rights, and then that's sort of where the narrative is, I think, it obviously is not ended, but that's sort of in a lot of historical contexts, of that's like, oh well, that's where the last major thing people are taught. That's until you start getting things like Title IX and for like women, and for like other groups start making advances, it just sort of moves on from, I think, brown skin focused racism, and I think it's so limiting. It's so limiting to exclude, obviously, to say that's the one story that people, especially who are African American or Latino people, like the Bracero program and things like that, like it's always this narrative of oppression and overcoming oppression, which is very powerful. But there's so many people who, like, yeah, that's happening, but that's not obviously all that's happening in their lives at all. Like that's not at all. That's but that's the only thing we ever get to know, and that's the only thing where it's like, oh well, as long as you know that, you can check it off, and that's good, and that's what you have to tick off, and you have to have, I think so. At least professionally, I mean, I think that's what's hurting, and that's why it's so important to have, to talk to different people and to include people, in different discussions and in professional settings. Especially again in my work in museums and in libraries and things like that. You have to include community stories, and you have to include that because that's how you're going to round out this historical narrative, and that's how you're going to make the picture of America more complete, the picture of the world more complete, picture of this 3-block radius that the little historical society, gets to care for complete.
So Heather, what does it feel like to actually literally have your hands on the narratives with all these items that you get to touch and look at and observe and imagine? What does that feel like to really be part of the narrative?
It's pretty terrifying, honestly, because I'm afraid I'm gonna screw up, and I'm afraid I'm gonna, be able to say all these great things, or read all these wonderful articles by all these other, brilliant thinkers throughout history, or even modern people who are speaking into social justice issues, and that I'm gonna blow it somehow, and not be able to practice what I preach. And but it's also, I think, so exciting, because I do have access to things and to these people's and different stories that hopefully other curators or other people have included, that maybe we just haven't put out yet for the public, or maybe we haven't, we did it another time, but that was 20 years ago or 50 years ago, and so we need to bring it back. And so I think that that's a really point of joy in my life, is being able to discover these stories that maybe other people knew, but it's my job to also tell this group over here. Like there's this, I recently was able to do an oral history project for the library on this woman. Her name is Geneva Valentine, and she owned the first Western Union telegram office in DC. She's the first woman, and also first African American to own a Western Union telegram, and she was this huge businesswoman in DC, and she got to meet the Queen. She got to go to the Queen Elizabeth
Wow.
II's coronation and all that stuff because she was such a well-respected person in DC. And, you know, she's very well known, especially in the African-American community in DC. But, you know, there are certain historical pockets, and getting to talk to her son was the project I was doing for these archives. It was such a joy, one, to learn about her life and this woman who, you know, has achieved so many, I think, professional goals that I hold in my own life, and that I got a new, you know, role model and inspiration that day, or and through the whole process of researching her. But also in being able to know, like, future researchers will get to know more about her, we'll get to know more about him, and, you know, the possibilities, especially online, of publishing these things and, like, getting these stories out so that you can, you know, I think sort of the argument of, like, oh, this, you know, we can't hire these people because they don't exist, or we can't tell, like, this history because it doesn't exist. I mean, like, that's not true. It's there. You just gotta find it, and so it's my job to make it easier to find, and make it easier to find for people not just in academic settings, make it easier to find for literally everybody. So hopefully, you know, if you're just I don't know, if you're Googling Valentine's, maybe something other than, like, little red hearts will pop up someday. It'll be this amazing woman.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But yeah, so it's terrifying, but it's also exhilarating because I just want to share and get everyone excited about everybody's history, not just the mainstream or not just the one that we've all been taught. So,
Good work. Thanks for sharing, Heather.
Yeah.